We're the ones who hit the animal. We try not to, obviously, but they run out on the roads and you don't always have a chance to stop. Over 1 million animals die on our roadways, not every decade, not annually, but daily. It was a shocking number.
This has been, since roads began to be put in, this has been an issue.
Yeah.
And the animal kill has always been an incidental, oh, that's what we have to pay for progress.
Imagine a world where roadways aren't present and development is not present. Animals need to move across the landscape. Some animals don't need to move far, and large animals perhaps need to move much greater distances to fulfill their daily, yearly, and life needs. It's a tough journey. If you have antlers, it's tough to go under barbed wire. If you're a smaller species, it's tough to jump over maybe a 6-foot barbed wire fence. All of our development, the way we've modified our environment has had a cost to species.
This is the Douglas Robbins Show.
Welcome back to the program, everyone. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. It is a conversation near and dear to my heart, and I've wanted to have it for many years at this point. So I'm so grateful to have on two guests who are making a difference. And this topic is about all the dead animals we see on the side of the road. It is heartbreaking for me, and I think everyone who sees them. It feels like a part of us has died, each one that we see. And God forbid, we're the ones who hit the animal. And we try not to, obviously, but they run out on the roads and you don't always have a chance to stop. But I'm so grateful to have these two on because they're going to be talking about solutions on how we can make changes in this. So, Amy, is it Amrhein?
Amrhein.
I knew I was going to get it wrong.
You had the most common mispronunciation, so
Okay.
good on you.
Amy is the co-coordinator of the Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition, and Colin Reynolds, he is the senior advisor, the Northwest Program of Defenders of Wildlife. Welcome both of you to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So let's just get at it. Let's start with the challenges and then we'll work our way over to the developing solutions. So I looked up a statistic and it was heartbreaking just reading the statistic. Over 1 million animals die on our roadways, not every decade, not annually, but daily. It was a shocking, shocking number. Does anyone from the Department of Transportation who maintains roads to car manufacturers, does anyone take responsibility for these deaths of these innocent creatures, or is it simply collateral damage for our modern society? Either of you can answer.
There is an excellent book called Crossings. I'm trying to take it's Ben
Goldfarb.
What's his last name?
Ben Goldfarb.
Yeah, and he wrote a book, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of when roads, first one we had the horse-drawn carriages, and then the asphalted roads came in. And there was a gentleman way back when who was appalled at the number of animals being killed by fast-moving vehicles. And this has been, since roads began to be put in, this has been an issue.
Yeah.
And the animal kill has always been an incidental, oh, well, that's what we have to pay for progress. So no, nobody has taken responsibility for it. I think we're turning the corner on that, but it has been a very long history of American progress with roads and the faster and faster cars, and really no concern for the.
Yeah, that's really well said, Amy. And Doug, thank you so much for having us on today to talk about this important topic. I want to echo Amy's thoughts about and perception that this is a growing issue. Not only are so many animals, big and small, killed daily, monthly, and yearly across the country, it's also affecting people in other ways, and this is maybe one of the reasons why it's gaining more and more attention. It causes thousands of human injuries and deaths a year, and millions upon millions of dollars in damage to vehicles. For someone like myself, I'm most of the time focused on the wildlife, but there's also the human dimension, and finding solutions to this is something I think a lot of people across the political spectrum and across any sort of, our culture can all agree on that is a worthwhile solution. And that's why we're so excited to see projects like Amy's come up to speed and things, we'll talk about more because there are solutions to this problem, really effective solutions, which is something that is exciting to talk about.
We have a leadership right now that seems indifferent towards the plight of animals, pollution, etc., rollbacks of nations, which is really horrible to see and witness. But so besides, maybe this question might be more for Colin, I'm not sure. But so besides the road deaths, you have the encroachment of habitats because there's more and more people, more and more developments. You have habitat loss, deforestation. Would you have any idea, Colin or Amy, what the population, how many, besides the animals that are killed on the roadways, how many animals are affected annually, nationally because of these other issues as well, forcing the animals to go onto the roads? They have less and less land. What would you say the percentage is, or how many of the statistics that are affecting the animals in that way as well? Would you know? Would you have that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think maybe one way to sort of look at this is, imagine a world where roadways aren't present and development is not present. Animals need to move across the landscape. Some animals don't need to move far, and large animals perhaps, need to move much greater distances to fulfill their daily, yearly, and sort of life needs. Species need to move from winter to summer grounds to find food. Species disperse, which is a kind of a fun, fancy word for just, move to find new territory, to find mates, to reproduce. And these journeys can be long distances. But right now, for most of our environment, they need to cross lots of what we call barriers to animal movement. So that could be development, that could be a new roadway or a parking lot that's blocking maybe a migration path. So animals need to either, find a way around that, or if it's a fence with barbed wire, a lot of times either jump over or maybe jump under, or not jump, crawl under. But it's a tough journey. If you have antlers, it's tough to go under barbed wire. If you're a smaller species, it's tough to jump over maybe a 6-foot barbed wire fence. If you're a species that needs to cross an interstate highway, how do you do that? How do you know when to do that? Are you almost put off by the noise of the vehicles? Now, there's a lot of collaring data, collaring in the sense of scientists will put literally radio collars on the necks of animals to track where they go, and they'll find that when they reach a roadway, they sort of bounce. I'm trying to, I know this is a audio thing, so I'm trying to describe it to an audience who's just hearing it, but it's almost like they're trying to find different ways to cross a road, and they're searching up and down this road, and it costs a lot of energy and time, especially when species need to move and get to a certain place by a certain period of time before the snows come. So all of our development, all of our, the way we've modified our environment has had a cost to species. Some species perhaps are more able to adjust, and then others aren't. So that's why projects like the one Amy's undertaken to build crossings, to guide animals across the road at places they want to cross is so effective, because wildlife crossings, we're kind of alluding to this. We're talking about wildlife crossings for a lot of sense. And basically wildlife crossings can go over the road, and they're almost like little bridges over the road, that the bridges are sort of designed to kind of look like normal habitat. There's rocks, bushes, things like that, grasses, or wildlife crossings could go under the road. And those crossings, when done well, when put in the right places and with the right sort of fencing to guide animals, can be a really effective way of basically of allowing animals to cross that road to continue their journeys, to exchange their genetic information, to flee forest fires, to move to areas where maybe are less affected by drought. But we're it's sort of like it's more of like a lifeboat, not to mix metaphors. We're trying to do the best we can and as urgently a sort of tempo as possible, because a lot of these species, they need a way to cross the road, to cross any road type of roadway before it's too late and their populations become severely affected.
Yeah.
Well, I can add to that just a little
Thank you,
bit of
Colin.
what we have. We don't have collar data in our project and in our area, but we do have trail cameras, and we have seen the documentation of exactly what Colin is saying is where the animals come up to Interstate 5 and turn away. They kind of walk up and down and then they turn away, whether it's the number of cars, the noise, the vibration, all of that. The other thing we have found is that animals, they need to cross the road for habitat, mating, food, whatever, a lot of reasons for it. But some of them will just find a way. We have a railroad crossing, and they walk across the railroad crossing across the interstate. There are culverts. Then the smaller animals will use the culverts. It's for obviously for water, but when there's no water in it, they will come through. If it's too long, the larger animals won't go through because it's too dark and they can't see the light at the end, or for a lot of reasons. But some of the smaller animals, foxes, and I don't say foxes. I think we've seen a couple of others in there also. Some cougars, maybe coyotes, but they cross the road when they need to cross the road, and that's when a lot of them get killed.
So it seems that they psychologically or inherently know, maybe from watching other animals perish or just seeing the danger. It seems that they are aware this is a high risk, and sometimes they'll turn away, and sometimes they know they need to continue forward for food or habitat or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of species will, follow the same migration route yearly. We have the United States Geological Service has put out some amazing migrations in the western United States, several volumes, and tracking where migrations are occurring all throughout the West. And for a lot of these species, you can almost time them by, the time of year, but also the location of where they're going to kind of move. And if suddenly there's a new building there or there's a new roadway there, that could really affect the species sort of, instinctual sort of pattern of where they want to go. And this is something that we see across the whole United States. The issues of this wildlife movement, Doug, I know you're in the East Coast. Roadways, we call it in this sort of the world we're in, wildlife vehicle collisions. Those occur everywhere. Vermont, New York, all throughout Virginia. And those are usually recorded by state Department of Transportations for larger mammals. But we also know that this happens a lot for smaller mammals or even insects. Large migrations of monarch butterflies going from, the Great Plains down to their wintering areas in northern Mexico, have to cover across several interstate highways, which is obviously extremely dangerous for small butterflies. And then out here in the West, I'm not sure, I can't recall if we mentioned, I'm based in Oregon, and, our team, we focus on Oregon and Washington. We see instances of barriers to wildlife movement, roads, and otherwise affecting species all throughout the region. And that's why, we've been so happy to work alongside and support the work Amy and her colleagues have done across Interstate 5 in an area in Southern Oregon. For those who might be listening on the East Coast, we have I-95, and then as you march west, the number gets down to I-5, the farthest west you can get. So basically I-95 in the east, we have I-5 in the west, and we have one national monument. I'm going to maybe tee this up for a second. We have one national monument in the United States that was expanded by two presidents for biodiversity and connectivity purposes. And of course, it's so ironic that this one national monument is directly bisected by an interstate highway, which is I-5 in Southern Oregon. But Amy and her colleagues are doing just amazing work down there to bring this national monument to reconnect the habitat in Southern Oregon, which is really a crossroads of biodiversity in the whole Western United States.
Yeah. So let us speak on the solutions. All is not dire, all is not obviously these animals. And I was just thinking while you were speaking, Colin, whenever I see them, they're always darting across the road. They never walk casually because they obviously know this is a high risk. I need to hightail it out of here as fast as I can. So, Amy, tell me about the solution with the animal corridors that you guys have. Did you initially, what was the advent of the corridor? When did it first, begin? Were you guys the first, or have they been kind of popping up all over?
We're the first in Oregon, or at least the first overpass in Oregon. There have been underpasses up on 97 on state highways, and our Central Oregon counterparts have worked very hard on those. Ours came about because I retired, and I had worked for a number of years with the scientists and the local advocates to create and expand the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. And I had been working as a field representative in Southern Oregon for U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley, and had worked very hard to expand the monument at the end of President Obama's administration. On his way out, he expanded the monument, again, for biodiversity, as Colin really well explained. And when I retired in 2020, there were a number of us who were kind of looking at each other, and in particular considering and looking at the idea that President Biden was going to, in fact, get an infrastructure bill done. And in the infrastructure bill, we all expected new money to be coming into the states, and thought that here was an opportunity to reconnect the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument with some sort of overpass, underpass, something in that area, and use new money coming in, because we all understood that trying to get existing transportation dollars that were meant for bridges and bikeways and pedestrian, all the important infrastructure projects that were in the transportation bills in the past generally weren't going to be allocated to wildlife crossings. This is kind of something new. So we, knowing, again, in the past that a stimulus bill was directed towards projects, we looked at each other and said, we need to get going because we need to be shovel ready when the money comes down. And we anticipated the money coming in a year or two. We knew these things move relatively slowly through Congress, but wanted to be ready to go. So a number of us got together. We live in Ashland and around Ashland, Oregon. So we wanted to look at the 14-mile corridor between Ashland, Oregon and the California border, which is up and over the Siskiyou Pass. And again, as Colin mentioned, it's Interstate 5 goes right through the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. We fundraised, we raised money, we contracted privately for a feasibility study, concept design study, got that done, worked very closely with the Oregon Department of Transportation, because we did not want to do something separate and then hand it off to ODOT, because that's not how you get things done. You need them involved in the planning so that they understand and that they're on board. We didn't want to just say, here, go do, we think this, and then they say, yeah, straight arm us. So they were intimately involved in all of this. And going back to your original question about the responsibility for, who takes responsibility for the animal crossings and the wildlife crossing collisions, ODOT had for a number of years, going back to 2016, had been keeping track of wildlife vehicle collisions, and so they had maps for where the wildlife had been killed and what wildlife had been killed, which was super helpful for us in determining where we wanted to go. So we looked at 8 locations, and at the end of 2023, it took us a year to do the feasibility study, again doing camera studies, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, which is the overseer of the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, along with the Southern Oregon University students, did the cameras. And so they had collected data for us to show us where the animals were and where they were moving. And we came up with 2 locations that were priority locations. One was on the north side of the Siskiyou Pass, and the challenge with that was it had conservation land on one side, but it had a lot of private property on the other side. And the second location was within the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument with public lands on both sides, Bureau of Land Management and the monument lands on both sides. So the animals would be able to come from public lands and go to public lands, and we wouldn't be funneling them through private property, which is always a challenge. And I will say we had a coalition of 17 organizations and agencies, and one of the really important part contributors and members of our coalition is the Oregon Hunters Association and the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And these folks, they want to hunt, and the migrations and the animal movements are incredibly important to them because they want healthy populations. And
Right.
so coalition has really been diverse, about as diverse as the animal population. We have environmental groups, we have federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife agencies, Oregon Department of Transportation, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, and again, Hunters Association, along with the local tribes. So we all came together, again, raised money, did the feasibility study, identified two main opportunities for the overpass, worked with Oregon Department of Transportation. They did their own studies and geotechnical studies of where the bridges would go. We all selected what we call the Mariposa site, which is at milepost 1.7 inside the Oregon border, inside Oregon from the California border. And at that point, we said, okay, we again, our eye on the infrastructure bill, which had passed. And inside the infrastructure bill, there was a new pot of money, the Wildlife Pilot Program grant for wildlife crossings. And they had $350 million to distribute over 5 years. So in 2023, the Oregon Department of Transportation applied for that grant for originally we applied for $20 million. And the first year we did not get it. They went to Colorado, Arizona, Wyoming, a lot of other states. I don't think New York got one, maybe North Carolina, but there was at least couple of states in the east that also received the funding. So we were disappointed, but not deterred, because again, this was a 5-year the infrastructure bill was 5 years, and so we knew they'd come back the next year with more money. So in 2024. And we did a debrief with the Federal Highway Administration, who was administering the grant, and they told us they loved the project. It was great. It was highly recommended for funding, but it fell below the funding line. They just ran out of money. And they encouraged us to come back the next year. So in 2024, we tweaked it a little bit. Costs had gone up. So we reapplied for $33 million. It was a big jump, but we decided to go ahead and apply. And we won the award. So in December of 2024, we found out we won the award, and construction was scheduled for 2027. Everything was a go. And then when the new Trump administration came in, and they froze everything. And we went, okay, so we had to wait to see what happened. And just 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration, Federal Highway Administration, put out a press release that they were releasing the funds for this Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program grant. And so we are moving forward, and we anticipate construction in 2026. We're hoping to move it up a little bit from 2027. So it's going to be a 200-foot wide, 700-foot long span. It's going to have landscaping. The tribes are very interested, and we have a subgroup from the Oregon planning process working with tribes and many of our members on what that landscaping will look like on top of the bridge. There will be 2 miles of fencing on each side, because Colin can speak more to this too, where we need to funnel the animals to the bridge. Again, when they come up and they can't get through, hopefully that, this is the whole, and there's been a lot of other wildlife crossings throughout the West. They've shown that the animals will find the bridge when there's fencing. So that's part of it. And there hopefully will be artwork on each side of the bridge, so people will understand what this is coming up to it. And we don't really want to do signs. We want to do something on the bridge so folks see it. Yeah, it's a major project. Oregon, the state of Oregon, 2 legislative sessions ago allocated $7 million to wildlife crossing planning and construction, which new to Oregon, and ODOT is using $1.5 million of that for the engineering and design planning. And without that, we wouldn't have been able to move forward. So new funding has been really important for this project. because once again, it's really challenging, as we all know. Budgets are tight everywhere, particularly transportation funding budgets are tight. And so getting any of that pre-allocated money was not going to happen. And so bringing new money to the project was huge. And we did our own fundraising, so we had a little bit of a match as well.
It's gonna hop. I mean, it's so well said by Amy, and I cannot explain how amazing Amy, her colleagues. There's so many people she's worked with, but it's just. I think I mentioned once, Amy. I was like, Amy, if we had 20 of you, like I'd be out of a job, but it'd be a good thing, right? You know, Doug. Like the reason why we want crossings is they work. This is something. If you've I don't know if you've traveled to the Netherlands, if you've gone to parts of India, like. Crossings are everywhere for all different types of species. We see crossings, you know, there's examples that come up of like on Christmas Island outside of Australia, there's a crossing for crabs that migrate over a roadway. In Australia, there's crossings for koala bears. In India, there's a lot of amazing work being done to make sure elephants stay off of railroads. Crossings don't necessarily have to occur on roads. It's railroads are a big issue for wildlife movement. You know, what we've seen though, and when we look at a lot of statistics that have been recorded in Canada and also the United States, is that when done right, crossings can result in upwards of a 90+% reduction in wildlife vehicle collisions on those roadways. And that's why, you know, Amy's first in Oregon overcrossing is so exciting for us advocates, because this is going to motivate in some additional projects. You know, Doug, where you're at, and this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, if you drive west on Interstate 90 from like Mass Pike all the way to Seattle, right before you get to Seattle, you'll go under the Snoqualmie Pass overcrossings in Washington State that connect essential habitat on the Cascade Mountains. And through cameras that have been placed there, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has seen all sorts of animals crossing those roadways. One thing Amy also mentioned is the Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program. That is that program that Amy mentioned that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And in this most recent year, where Amy's project received the amazing award, one other project that received an award, I'll make two examples. One example is the red wolf crossing in eastern North Carolina. Red wolves are an incredibly endangered species of wolves, and their habitat is bisected by several roadways. And so a lot of advocates, my organization, Defenders of Wildlife, another organization, Wildlands Network, put in for a grant application that was awarded for the WCPP program for wildlife crossings in eastern North Carolina. Another example, and just sort of bringing back that I-90 thread, you know, we have a project that I mentioned in the western part of I-90. In the eastern part, there was a project in Massachusetts in the Berkshires that received funding to begin the process of constructing a wildlife crossing in western Massachusetts. So wildlife crossings can occur anywhere across the United States, but we have seen a lot of the more substantial ones in the western United States, you know, punctuated by the Wallace-Annenberg crossing outside of, or in Los Angeles, that is currently under construction, that will be the largest wildlife crossing, definitely in the United States, perhaps the world. But right now, and you know, just the call to action for all your listeners when they listen to this, the Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program is up for reauthorization or potential reauthorization right now. You know, we're taping this, I guess I can say the date, on May 21st. Within the next few weeks, a lot of advocates are making sure to, you know, make sure all members of Congress are contacted to encourage them who are involved in the transportation process to have money to make the Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program a permanent program, because these projects can occur across the United States, red states, blue states. You know, when we look at states that are leading the way, we look towards Colorado, we look towards Wyoming. So this is a bipartisan issue. And when I had the opportunity to go to state houses to advocate for some really amazing state, you know, innovations in terms of policy and funding, there's no topic legislators or their staff enjoy talking more about than wildlife crossings. It's something that everyone can agree with. No one likes hitting a deer or an elk on a roadway. So how we can get those animals to the other side is something we could all agree should happen.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you,
And
Amy.
if
Go
I
ahead.
can, I was going to just jump in, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due. The first Trump administration was actually where federal funding for wildlife crossings started, with an executive order from the Secretary of Interior that directed the Bureau of Land Management to look at and get serious about creating safe passage for the large animals, again, the migrators, the deer, the elk. And so nothing happened, didn't get an infrastructure bill then, and Biden administration continued this with the infrastructure bill. And again, since the Trump administration, this is one of the first programs to be released for funding. And so we're just really pleased with that. And just to say, this is bipartisan. And again, going back to our coalition, all walks of life are supporting this.
That's wonderful. Right, it's bipartisan. We all drive. Nobody wants to see these
Right.
poor animals killed, and it's a risk to everyone when there's a deer running out, or, you know.
And it's a rural issue.
Yeah.
And you know, it's certainly in the cities, but more so in the rural areas where folks are driving on rural roads for long distances.
Yeah.
And if you hit something out there and you total your car,
Absolutely.
hopefully you aren't hurt, but it's still damage to vehicle, and quite honestly, it shakes you up.
Absolutely.
It's a traumatic experience for human beings as well.
Yeah, we don't want to kill, right? This is just deep down. I think intrinsically we have love, care for animals, you know. So I had some, you know, I live about 2 hours north of New York City, so in a fairly rural farming community. And the other day I was driving down a road. It's a 55-mile-an-hour road, and there was a car coming towards us, and I was going to, you know, the other direction, and a deer ran out. And luckily, it missed the car, or the car missed it, and I was able to swerve a little bit, maybe just 5 feet, and that was enough for the deer to stop, or he was going to run into us or be hit by us, but he was able to stop, turn around, the other car had stopped, and he ran back into the woods. And it's just one of those situations. It could have been very different, and it was just one of those, you know, kind of few dodged a bullet, so to speak, but I would have been, the car would have been damaged, but this poor deer is just trying to live out its life and follow migration patterns, or habitat, or seeking food, or a mate. But so just so many near misses. So let me ask you guys this, and Colin, you answered the question before I asked it, by the way. So I was going to ask about what is Europe doing, what are people doing overseas, but you've already asked that, so thank you for your answer. But how many corridors are there right now in the States? And then what is the project, you know, the projected numbers that we're looking for, you know, say in 10 or 20 years? Like, well, what is it? Where are we, and where are we trying to go with the numbers?
I try to be
Ideally.
positive. I try to be positive whenever speaking publicly, right? And
Yes.
and so I'll couch it in that way. You know, I when the, you know, interstate highway system was developed in the 50s, you know, I don't think, you know, this issue was top of mind, or even something that sort of our predecessors thought about. I think, you know, in a perfect world, crossings for wildlife movement need to occur at a pretty, you need to, depending on the location, they need to be like once a mile, once every couple miles for certain species. Now, like, you know, in a world, say, maybe soon, you know, we have cars that are more self-driving, you know, maybe we will need crossings in, for example, Doug, you mentioned you're going, you know, and maybe more of a rural roads, you know, we're not going to necessarily have a crossing there, but maybe, you know, a car like that, you know, or with a driver assist, you know, maybe that could allow for less collisions that way, sort of through technology. But there are roadways that, even in a fantasy world where we have self-driving cars and, you know, there's basically no vehicle collisions, the barrier to wildlife movement will still exist. We'll still need crossings to allow for species to safely cross roadways and not be deterred So I think there is a need in like really high biodiversity areas to have crossings, and that's why Amy's project like is top of that list. To allow
Yeah.
butterflies to cross the highway is just amazing, and all sorts of smaller animals. So, maybe my sort of just to sort of bring that all together, like maybe in the future we may not need crossings to specifically prevent or reduce the numbers of wildlife vehicle collisions, because maybe technology could serve as a partial solution, but the need to reconnect fragmented habitat will always be there, and that's a project that our the next several generations will need to take on, and I'm hopeful we'll all do our part, and we'll constantly improve the environment generation by generation. And they basically kind of where we're at now is maybe the worst it's going to be. And now projects like Amy's are starting to solve that problem. And we're just going to start building on that and building on that and building on that. And we're going to get new projects in new locations, like in the Berkshires and elsewhere.
And I will say too, just
Thank
to
you.
add on to that one, in our 14-mile stretch, we identified 8 locations. Again, there's a culvert, there's an overpass bridge where we might be able to upgrade some trail passage that's already there that the deer are already using, but we can upgrade it. Most of these projects don't have to be in the multi-million-dollar projects. There are a lot of opportunities where you can just do a trail along underneath the bridge, just to give the animals some space and maybe some protection with trees and bushes, and just give them a better terrestrial pathway. Or if you're putting in a culvert, then you make a little, you make space, 3 feet space on one side of it where terrestrials, and you're making fish passage, but you can also do terrestrials. I think it's that the fish folks need to think broader, like that if you're doing a culvert, you're doing a new bridge, or you're renovating, you're upgrading something, all kinds of transportation projects, including a bridge or any kind of, again, fish passage, needs to think about terrestrial animals as well, and how can we add that on and take that into consideration with our upgrades when we do this for more. And again, it's an add-on, so it doesn't have to be multi-million dollars. It
Right.
can maybe be, 1 million, or even, we're doing a small project under an exit that's going to be $350,000. Because the maintenance guys can do it, and they can do it in their own time, and they're just upgrading a path and all of that, upgrading a culvert, or clearing out a culvert that's plugged. It's just a mindset for the maintenance and the engineers at our Department of Transportations in each state to just think a little bit broader than just the car passage.
So it seems ideally, anyway, we would have thousands and thousands of animal corridors across the nation. But question, so you had brought up collars before, Colin, and I'm curious, the existing corridors, how far, is there any numbers on this or studies on this? How far will an animal go, collared animal, to find or to go around the danger and go to the corridors? Any idea?
There's examples, I think. So to answer briefly, they'll go far and they'll try their darndest. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. A couple of years ago, I was sort of knee deep on pronghorn migrations in Wyoming, and there's such amazing research. A lot of really amazing researchers have done really great work out there tracking these migrations, and that's actually led to the designation and recognition and hopeful protection of a lot of these migration corridors within Wyoming, as led by the state. Another state that's leading the way on protecting migration corridors and habitat. And a lot of these researchers have shown that, depending on the species, they will go up and down these roadways long distances to eventually
Really?
find a way across. It's part of it is like, oh, that's amazing, the resilience. The other part of it is, for at least for me, it's really like kind of sad at the same time, because that's a lot of energy and time expended
Good point.
for these species that are just wanting to get to the other side.
Yeah. Wow.
And I can add on to that too. When we had ODOT did a value engineering process on our project, and really brought down, hopefully will bring down the cost of the bridge. But talking about how long the fence should be, on each side. And the standard that was talked about, and again in Denver and around the West, generally is about 2 miles on each side, a little bit longer. And ours actually is going into California, which makes us a bi-state project because we're at mile point 1.7, so it will go into California. And our thought was, can we go ahead and fence the entire up and over the Cascade Siskiyou, or excuse me, the Siskiyou Ridge? How far can we, is it protecting the animals, or is it, they need to get across, so
Yeah.
we don't want to fence it with, we need to be able to get them to the overpass. But it's a big question. And also, where do you end the fence so that they don't have, it's an area where they're going to harm themselves by crossing there. So you have to have, when you end the fence, you have to have a wide or a long space where cars can see the animals in case that's where they start crossing. So there's some danger in the ends of the fences as well.
Yeah, I would think that would create a lot of anxiety for the animals, saying like, I need to be over there, or their instincts are, I need to be over there, and they're blocked, and they have to keep following this fence line. But yeah, what is the balance? What is the fine line?
And the idea is that eventually
Yeah.
and the grandmother deer teaches
Yeah.
everybody else, and then they start to follow, and then it becomes generational knowledge, and it's just something they do.
Hopefully, yeah. Couple more questions for you guys. I really appreciate this, your thorough answers, and just taking this time. Colin, you had brought up self-driving cars, etc., and I've thought about this before, and so I'm a motorcycle rider, and I don't know how effective it is, but they have like a deer signal that's supposed to put out a frequency or a vibration of some sort that a deer picks up on. I don't know how effective it actually is, but for instance, if you have a loud Harley Davidson running, it scares everything, including me. But animals will react to the sound, to the vibration, to the frequency. Are there any things that car manufacturers, to get back to them, can do that a deer could maybe pick up on the sound, or a raccoon, whatever animal would hear this and maybe be a little repelled or by? Or are the cars just moving too fast for that?
That's a great question. I think generally speaking, if someone puts like a deer whistle on a car, I think the research shows that unfortunately they're not as effective as we would hope they would be.
Yeah.
Potentially, like, we just take maybe the solution is just an all of the above approach, which is, we have ways so that drivers can drive more safely, especially in areas where we know animal migrations occur. We have crossings, we have directional fencing, we have kind of all of the above. And I'll throw out another term for you and your audience, because what we want to do is we want to increase the permeability of these barriers. So, they kind of intuitively make sense. We have a barrier. Animals, it's either they don't want to cross it, they try and they get harmed. So we want to try to find ways to make sure animals can cross those barriers. We have crossings, we have culverts that can be retrofitted, etc. And then, like Amy said, over time, maybe after several generations of deer crossing an area the same manner, you have a new sort of path that deer know to travel, and then the problem hopefully decreases in severity.
So, not to try to place blame, but should car manufacturers be doing more?
I guess Colin, I can yield to you, but I don't know what they can do. And maybe some funding.
That does lead me to my
that's-
final position, but
That's
yeah.
a policy question.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it seems that our hands are washed. We have nothing to do with it. We take no responsibility for it.
Well, I think, one thing we need to, the exciting part about what projects like what Amy's doing and what a lot of our colleagues are doing, and even Defenders of Wildlife is doing, is a crossing needs to occur at a certain location based on science, or, as indicated by, unfortunately, where these collisions occur. But we need to make sure that, so say Amy builds a crossing, or she will, it's happening. We need to make sure that animals can get to that crossing and they're not impeded. So as a condition of making these crossings, we need to make sure that a housing development doesn't occur right there. So this is we sort of this is now a landscape level conversation
Yeah.
of, hey, we need to make sure we know where the crossings are for which species, whether we're building a crossing for a frog migration, which occurred just north of me in north of Portland on a U.S. Highway 30. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife literally, as of like 2 months ago, unveiled a frog crossing, which has already shown results because frogs
Wow.
wanted to get from an area they spend some part of the year to an area where they, obviously during a different part of the year, they would like to go. And of course, there's a road in the way. So they identify where frogs want to go and they build a crossing under the roadway. And they did in such a manner that frogs want to cross. So, when we do this, though, we want to identify where these crossings should be, build the crossings, but also allows us to have a conversation on what happens to the left and the right of the crossing. And whether that's further habitat protections, whether that's further management protections. A lot of these projects occur on public lands or lands that are owned by the federal government. So it allows us to talk to the U.S. Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management and say, hey, what management sort of amendments could we make to the forest plan or the resource management plan, which is what a lot of BLM management occurs under, to facilitate the success of these crossings? So do we want to designate a migration route? Do we want to prevent some sort of activity on both sides of the crossing? And it allows us to start to kind of restitch what is unfortunately a fragmented habitat.
Right.
And I do think, going back to what we were talking about earlier too, it's a mindset in our transportation engineers and departments. And when they do anything to a road, that they stop to think, is there something we can do here for the wildlife? It's just too often it's a frog. It didn't hurt my car.
Yeah.
It didn't hurt me. I didn't even know I hit it. It's unimportant. So how do, and I think, again, as we do more of this, as states begin to fund wildlife crossing planning and construction, and they're directing both their wildlife departments, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in our case, and our transportation agencies to work together to, and Oregon, the legislature directed the Fish and Wildlife Department to develop a map of important wildlife corridors, of where the animals went and where. So, and now we can now start looking as a state of saying, okay, what are our priorities in the state and where should we go first to look at for crossings? Again, underpasses, overpasses,
Yeah.
culvert, however, signs, do we do some flashing signs with motion detectors? Something. And so having the policy in place to direct the Department of Transportation and the Fish and Wildlife agencies to work together to develop maps, to develop policy, and then fund it.
Right.
All of that is, and then that helps we always call it the inside-outside game, right? We have the folks like us and the advocates pushing for policy change and to raise awareness, and then you have the inside game of the policy, and they all work together to raise consciousness and raise awareness and raise funding for what needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah,
Complicated.
and you guys are doing such important work, and so thank you for illuminating this. But I was thinking about the frog corridor, and I love the idea, and it's kind of cute thinking about frogs crossing, but then you think, oh, but they've been reduced to this, to needing this. And then you said an interesting term, the fragmentation of habitat. And I think that really summarizes what you guys are trying to do, is piece parts of habitats together in a safe manner. So last piece that I'd like to bring up is, and Amy, we had spoken about this a few weeks ago, in that is, you were saying you need more funding. You need funding to come from more places. And I had suggested or mentioned, I'm surprised insurance companies don't or haven't got involved in a major way, because they're spending millions and millions of dollars on accidents with animals. They would look like the good guys if they were putting money up towards these corridors. What great marketing that would be for Allstate or Nationwide or whomever, saying, look at us, we care about animals, about people, that would be a win-win for everybody. So now they're saving money from all the money they're paying out. They're doing something good. People's lives are being saved, and it's a win-win. So why would has that not been pursued, or I understand you wouldn't want to say Allstate on a corridor, overpass or something, but it just seems like they could be on the right side.
Colin, you take that first.
Yeah, Doug, such a great idea, and it sounds like you have a pitch that has been fine tuned.
Maybe we can speak about this off.
Yeah. The projects that I'm involved in Oregon, we're not at the phase yet where we're talking big bucks like that we could bring, that we could go hat in hand to an insurance company. I'm not sure if Amy, they were able to get money through the federal programs. I'm not sure if they ever kind of went down the road of sort of knocking on the doors like that. That is a great idea that I think, is totally something that is worthwhile pursuing in the future.
I agree. We didn't have to. We have had a couple of conversations of what happens if we don't get $30 million from the federal government through this grant. Do we try to fundraise? And I'm like, I don't know how to raise $33 million. And with costs going up, right? So you get the 33 and now it's gone to 45. It's beyond our group's capacity. We could raise 300,000 for some studies and some matching money, but millions is another whole level. I think, as Colin mentioned, there's no place besides individual projects going and asking for the money. There's no place for them to put the money. So there's, besides federal funding, as far as I know, there's no wildlife crossing nationwide organization that's raising money for this. And I may be wrong on that. There may be something out there. I know of a lot of organizations that, again, are working on our individual projects. The Colin mentioned the Wallace Annenberg project down in Southern California. That was mostly, if not all, done with private money. And it was a big project. And they just, once the ball started rolling, the phone started ringing and saying, how much can I give you? And I think, their story of the mountain lions being stranded on one side and being inbred and then getting killed. They had a really good animal story that people pulled on their heartstrings, and some money came to them. Yeah. Although it took 10 years of planning. We told them we did ours in 5, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? The other industry I would also, besides the insurance industry, is also the trucking industry. Because most, if not all, but many of these wildlife vehicle collisions are with truckers.
Sure.
And when they hit a bear, we didn't mention bears. We have a lot of bear crossing, and actually on one of our first tours of our stretch of highway, there was a dead bear in the culvert next to the road on the ditch. And, these are big animals. When they do some serious damage. Yeah. And when you said you swerved, you're not supposed to swerve. You're supposed to hit it. They all say don't swerve because you're going to get in a bigger accident or a more serious accident than if you just hit it. But if you hit the trucker, anyway, the point being, the insurance companies and the trucking industry both, I think, have a big stake in saving money by contributing or at least supporting the concept of wildlife crossings.
Yeah, it'd be hard to swerve a truck.
Right.
For sure.
Right. And you're coming down a steep, 6% decline off a mountain pass. Yeah. You're just praying at that point.
Yeah. I've seen a dead bear on I-87, which runs, up New York State. And it's just horrible to see. And then I'd seen another one in the Catskills on a road that dissects the Catskill Mountains. And it's very upsetting, when you see that. And my goodness, if we could all do more to reduce that, we're moving in the right direction.
You mentioned the deer cross.
Yeah.
And you try to stop. You stop.
Yeah.
But then you don't see the 2 little fawns coming after, and they're all darting, and you think you've missed the deer, and now you hit the fawn, and it's
yeah. And I have what's that, Colin?
I'm not sure if you saw it. I messaged you. I have to run for a meeting at 1:15, so I just want to thank you, Doug, and it's so good to see Amy, but thank you so much You know,
Yeah, I was late.
no. If for those in the audience who are interested in learning more about wildlife crossings, defenders.org, there's all sorts of links to wildlife crossings. I'll let Amy, I mean, I'm more than happy to plug Amy's project, but she can direct you to her website. And this is just part of the process of getting, the word out there. So thank you so much, Doug, for having me.
It's been a pleasure,
Next
Colin.
week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin.
Well, Amy, this has been such a remarkable conversation. I really, truly appreciate your great insights, knowledge, Colin's as well. I mean, it's just a subject I think it's sort of an out of sight, out of mind. You see the dead animal, you feel bad, you move on to the store or wherever you're going, and life continues, but not for the animal. And sometimes it's heartbreaking. You see a whole family of, say, raccoons, and it's just terrible. You see, can't we do more? And it seems that we can, and I think if people really put their will behind it, can make a big difference because, the habitat loss is going to continue. There's more and more people, more and more development, but maybe we can do some things that, as Colin, I had never heard that term, fragmented habitat. It's such an interesting term, and it really summarizes everything you guys are speaking about.
Yeah, and I want to encourage folks who have some organizational skills and some interest in this. You can get out and you can do it. There is interest. There are people who want to do something about this, and they just need organization. They just
Yes.
need, how do we get this done?
Somewhere to put their energies.
Right, exactly. And, Jack Williams is my co-coordinator, and we are two retirees who had some experience and had some connections, and were able to get this done. And again, 5 years. This is like record speed. Most of these projects take 10 to 15 years. But part of the reason that we have been successful is because funding came available.
Yeah.
And that there's been statewide support, there's been national support, there's money out there, there's private money out there. Again, we're just making people aware of the problem, and again, specificity. Where do we need it? How do we get it done? And we're happy to have conversations with anybody who needs to build a coalition. We build a coalition, and our coalition is not a nonprofit. One of our members is the Oregon Wildlife Foundation in Portland. I should have mentioned them earlier. They are a nonprofit, and they have been our fiscal sponsor, and they have been phenomenal at helping us raise the money that we needed, and then applying for the grants, because we're not grant writers. We don't know how to do this, but they did, and they supported us the whole way, and they have been tremendous. Again, so in each state, I'm sure there are organizations that will help guide and support, and Defenders of Wildlife has been tremendous, and they are nationwide as well.
So, Amy, if somebody would like to donate to the cause, time, or let's just say money even, money's always good.
Right.
Where should they send it to? To your organization?
Right, so we have a website, myowf/SOWCC, which is Southern Oregon Wildlife Crossing Coalition. Again, myowf/SOWCC. And we have all of our information on there. The money, again, will go through the Oregon Wildlife Foundation, but there's a click on there for donate that will direct it towards our efforts. Yeah, anything and all is welcome. We, again, have several smaller locations along our 14-mile corridor that we're still trying to raise money for and identify what's the best way for the passage to be improved. So there's always look at your local states, look at your local organizations, call your local Hunters Association or your local environmental organization and say, what are you doing and how can we help? So keep it local too. I mean, a lot of this is just people, when we start talking about it, they say, well, why didn't you do it here? Why didn't you do it here? Why Route 62 or farther north on I-5? It's like, we live here. We know this area. This is where we start. And when we get it done here, then we can show you our model, and other people can go do it somewhere else.
Yeah.
We are a very local group.
So hang on, I'm gonna say the final closing, and stay with me though. I'd like to talk to you after the show ends. Okay.
Sure, certainly.
So thank you so much, Amy Amrhein. Got your name right now. Colin Reynolds with the Defenders of Wildlife. You can certainly donate to them as well. I mean, again, it's just been an illuminating show, and I think all my listeners and myself are grateful for it. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
This is the Douglas Robin Show.